All right, so this will be Module 8 presentation for budget presentation, LEAD 6123, Dr. Caudill. We're going to focus on a nonprofit, agribusiness child development, also referred to as ABCD. A little background on ABCD is they are a nonprofit that is located in New York State. There's 13 centers. Today we're going to be specifically talking about the center in Holly, New York, which is probably about 25 miles west of Rochester, New York. And you can see it there in the picture. That's called Grace's Place Agribusiness Child Development. We're going to be focusing on specifically this center. Governed federally by developed Head Start programming, performance standards, and parent-run policy council and committee. As you can see here, when we talk about budgeting, you always want to kind of go back to what the strategic plan is and also understand what the mission statement and the vision statement of the organization is. And here they are. So to kind of talk a little bit about the staff that we have at the Holly location, we're going to talk a little bit about our center director, who we actually did an interview with, and we'll be discussing some of those details later on. But also the education coordinator, family home liaison. That's a critical role on working with the population at hand and its diversity for its success. And then obviously as a educational entity, you have your teaching staff and your assistants, and then some other professional staff members included, your maintenance folks. You have a nurse, you actually have a cook on staff too as well, and then another critical role is the program assistant. The particular facility that they're located at is roughly 12,000 square feet. They have their own playground for the kids, and then also there's a kitchen because they provide food for the entire student population. So when we get into budget expenditures and revenue sources, we're going to look at some of the expenditures. Obviously, the main ones with many organizations seems to be salaries. We look at the payroll and the benefits package, roughly looking at $722,000 worth of expenditures solely on just payroll. So it's pretty expensive, but for the most part, we understand that in education that typically seems to be the case. Then obviously our building utilities, electrical, natural gas, things of that nature. And then outside services, we'll talk about those here in a little bit, and then we'll get to funding and revenue sources. So with some of the expenditures, when we look at those, 77% of the expenditures are coming from salaries and benefits packages. Then with 20% coming from the building utilities, and then also, outside services, not building utilities. So with the outside services, we look at a lot of those, and it could be transportation, which is a really big one. Then also some of the folks that are coming in and providing other services, whether it's disability, occupational therapy, and then also speech as well. And then we have admin supplies in there too, which are pretty minimal as far as like paper, copy services, and things of that nature. So looking at the total expenditures for this particular location in Holly is $934,000 and 542. So when we look at the revenue and the funding sources, one of the things that I was trying to understand is specifically where are they getting their dollars from? And talking with Myrna Hernandez, the center director, she was explaining to me that 75% of the funding comes from the state, with about 25% coming from the federal funding, which again, another critical pot, but the majority of the funding is coming from the state, which is roughly for this academic year, and this is a full year-round center. They go all the way through the summers, and their fiscal year ends March 31st. So we have about $582,000 that's coming from the state, and everything is based solely on enrollment, and the priority with enrollment is specifically on seasonal and migrant workers. And there's going to be some challenges that we'll talk about a little bit later here at one of our final slides on what the definition of somebody that can count for an enrolled family. And then grant funding, they're trying to secure that every year and hopefully get multiple year awards, some fees also, some fundraising that they do for professional development, and then some of the county reimbursements that we had talked about earlier, like the speech and the disabilities services. Those actually get reimbursed by the county. Looking specifically at revenue and funding for this year was $959,000. So you do have a surplus of roughly $25,000. So these are the interview results that we had with Myrna Hernandez. She's a center director. She's been there for 9 years, and she is responsible for leading and supervising all staff members and managing the budget. Which again, she stated that trying to manage the budget's one of the hard things because again, every year is different, and there's a lot of moving parts in the budget. And some of those challenges and some of the stories that we're going to talk about, again, probably are better selling points than just looking specifically at numbers. Um, with this particular agency, you're going to see that, again, the priority is to serve seasonal and migrant worker families. Less families are traveling due to the new restrictions going across the border. So now that there's more, well, I'd say there's less H-2A workers, then obviously you're seeing an enrollment drop. So that's obviously going to be a challenge for her and her staff, and also a lot of the other centers across Western New York, because Western New York is a heavily agriculturally driven, business or economy. So seasonal status now are becoming a little bit harder too as well, because if you have a family that comes in and they tend to live there for over 2 years, then they don't necessarily count as an enrollment number. So that becomes problematic. So there's less people that are moving from county to county, which would be eligible for an enrollment number, but unfortunately, not much of that is happening. Recruiting is big. They don't necessarily have the resources to have a dedicated recruiter. So most of it is done through their existing families through word of mouth, and then we have some local community-based organizations like Oak Orchard that really help them out on getting more participation and then getting families aware of these services for this agency. So again, it's a pre-K, early childhood educational sector facility working directly with migrant and seasonal workers, but there's also some families that can participate too as well, but they have to pay extra fees if they want to send their son or daughter there. There's also political advocacy from the CEO and the executive director to express the program challenges and need at the federal and at the state level, because again, these folks aren't getting as much money as your public institutions or your public state schools are. So one of the challenges Myrna expressed to us is a lot of moving parts with the budget, trying to manage it, and every year is different. One year you could have a freezer go down or a stove go down. That could be very expensive. So for her, she particularly likes to have a surplus in the budget. That's so she has some flexibility for some of those emergency funding situations. And obviously the recruiting we talked about, and then the one of the examples that she gave me was they had a stove that was relatively expensive. Again, if you're looking at like a commercial stove that's providing meals for folks, breakfast, lunch, every day throughout the entire year, and you have maybe a $10,000 stove go down, that could be problematic. And luckily enough, they were able to find a nutrition grant that they were able to secure and buy a new stove. So it was just one of the examples that she was given to me. And again, it was rather fascinating kind of seeing the different funding sources come through, some of the challenges that they have to deal with, particularly at their center, but also going back to who are they serving. Again, it's a very, very important, educational service that I feel, especially given the population and the dynamic, to give these young people and these young families that are, really working below poverty wages, to give them the necessary services to be successful and to get them into the community in Western New York. With that being said, these are the references are from our interview, and then also one of their mission statement PDFs, and then also their actual website.